Evelyn Parker had never imagined that the day she retired after 40 years of hard work would feel so heavy with disappointment. The moment she received her final paycheck, she expected pride and relief, but instead she felt a subtle tension in the room as her children glanced at her with barely concealed impatience. She had spent decades building a career, paying taxes, supporting herself, and occasionally helping family. Yet as she placed her check into her wallet, she realized that something fundamental had shifted in the eyes of those she loved most. Walking through her sunlit living room, she noticed the careful way Linda Parker, her 40-year-old daughter, adjusted her posture as she prepared another list of demands about finances and household contributions. Michael Parker, her son, appeared distracted, offering polite but perfunctory acknowledgments before returning to his phone, leaving Evelyn to feel the quiet weight of invisibility. She sat down in her favorite armchair, the familiar leather worn from years of use, and exhaled slowly, letting herself observe every detail of their behavior without reacting. Her gaze swept across the kitchen where the subtle clues of entitlement were clear, Linda arranging unpaid bills, as if Evelyn's retirement funds were a resource to be managed for convenience. Michael casually mentioning plans that assumed her continued labor in managing household logistics. Evelyn felt a mix of hurt and clarity. She recalled the long years of sacrifice, the overtime, the extra shifts, the small pleasures she had foregone to support family members, and she began to catalog every slight and overlooked effort, not in bitterness but in preparation. She remembered advice from David Thompson, the old family attorney and friend of her late husband, who once told her that patience and observation often reveal more than confrontation ever could. Evelyn sipped her morning coffee, feeling its warmth steady her, and she began to map in her mind the pattern of behavior that had emerged over years, subtle manipulations, understated dismissals, moments where her contributions were acknowledged only superficially. She observed Linda across the room, carefully placing the latest list on the counter, every motion precise, confident, almost rehearsed, revealing an expectation that Evelyn would comply without question. Michael's distracted nods and polite but empty affirmations highlighted the pattern further, reinforcing the reality that her presence and efforts were taken for granted. Evelyn reflected on her own response. She would not react immediately, she would not confront impulsively, but she would allow herself to see clearly, to witness, and to prepare. Each glance, each casual comment, each understated gesture became a piece of evidence in her mind, a detailed record of the truth she now faced. The house was quiet, filled with the soft sounds of daily life, yet the weight of unspoken expectations and subtle disregard pressed heavily. Evelyn's thoughts crystallized into a decision. She would take her time, she would observe, and she would allow the unfolding of events to reveal the reality of her family's priorities. Her calm composure and measured demeanor were not signs of weakness, but of strategy, patience, and a deep understanding that dignity is preserved not in confrontation, but in the quiet awareness of truth. With that, she leaned back, allowed her hands to rest in her lap, and prepared to enter a new chapter of life, one where her worth would be recognized not for convenience, but for the integrity and wisdom she carried with her through decades of work and care. The following week, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Evelyn woke early as she always had, even though there was no office waiting for her anymore. Years of routine had trained her body to rise with the morning sun. She prepared coffee, opened the curtains, and watched the neighborhood come alive. For a few peaceful minutes, she allowed herself to enjoy the quiet. Then Linda entered the kitchen carrying a stack of papers. Without even sitting down, she placed them on the table. "I made a list of things we should start discussing," she said. Evelyn looked down. Budget estimates, property expenses, notes about future living arrangements. What caught her attention was not the documents themselves. It was the language. The repeated use of the word we whenever her money was involved. Linda spoke confidently, as though decisions had already been made. "Now that you have more free time, you could help with childcare during the week," she continued. "It would save us a lot of money." Evelyn nodded politely and listened. She noticed how naturally her daughter discussed her schedule, her time, and her retirement income without ever asking what Evelyn wanted. Later that afternoon, Michael stopped by. He greeted his mother with a quick hug before settling into the living room. Within minutes, the conversation shifted toward finances. He mentioned rising mortgage costs, unexpected repairs, and the challenges of raising teenagers. None of it was unusual. What was unusual was the expectation quietly hidden beneath every sentence. Evelyn recognized it immediately. Neither child was asking how she planned to spend this new chapter of her life. Neither asked about travel plans, hobbies, friendships, or dreams she had postponed during 4 decades of work. The conversations always seemed to return to what she could provide for them. That evening, the family gathered for dinner. Evelyn watched carefully from her seat at the table. Linda spoke enthusiastically about future expenses. Michael discussed his financial concerns. Both seemed comfortable assigning responsibilities to their mother while discussing their own needs in great detail. Then a moment occurred that stayed with Evelyn long after the meal ended. Linda laughed and said, "At least now Mom does not have anywhere important to be every day." The comment was followed by light laughter around the table. Nothing cruel, nothing openly hostile. Yet the room suddenly felt different. Evelyn smiled politely, but inside she reflected on the words. 40 years of work, 40 years of responsibility, 40 years of contributing to society, supporting family, paying bills, and solving problems. Somehow all of that had been reduced to having nowhere important to be. After dinner, she quietly loaded dishes into the dishwasher while the others returned to their conversations. Through the doorway, she overheard Linda discussing future plans. "The good thing is that Mom has plenty of time now," she said. "We can finally count on her." Evelyn paused for a second, not because she was angry, because she was beginning to understand. Retirement had not changed her value. It had simply revealed how others measured it. As she finished cleaning the kitchen, she remembered something her late husband used to say. "People often tell you exactly who they are. The challenge is listening before it is too late." That night, Evelyn sat alone in her favorite chair and reviewed the events of the day. The pattern was becoming clearer with every conversation. Her children were not treating her like a person entering a well-earned new chapter. They were treating her like a resource that had become available. And for the first time, she began wondering what would happen if that resource stopped saying yes. One afternoon, David Thompson, the trusted family attorney and longtime friend of Evelyn's late husband, called to schedule a meeting. Evelyn had been expecting some routine paperwork, but was unaware that this visit would change her perspective entirely. She prepared herself calmly, arranging her notes and reviewing small details she had observed over the past week. When she arrived at the law office, the sleek modern interior and floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city skyline in golden afternoon light. She took a seat at the polished wood conference table while David opened a thick folder containing documents meticulously prepared years ago by her husband. He looked at her with a calm expression, signaling that what he was about to reveal was important. As he began to explain, Evelyn listened intently, absorbing every word. The papers contained specific provisions regarding her children's behavior, conditions that directly impacted the distribution of assets and other resources in the family. David outlined how each clause had been designed to ensure respect and fairness toward Evelyn, protecting her from the subtle manipulations and disregard she had already begun to notice. She examined each page carefully, recognizing the foresight and care her husband had taken to protect her. At one point, David asked Evelyn if she understood the full implications of the documents. She nodded slowly, feeling a mix of relief and empowerment. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint street noise outside the windows. Evelyn could see the sun glinting off the glass walls, casting sharp lines of light across the table, emphasizing the weight of the moment. She realized that all the subtle behaviors from her children, the insistence on her involvement, the quiet expectations, the hints of impatience and convenience, were now backed by a legal framework she could use to assert her dignity and rights. No confrontation was necessary at this stage. She would observe, wait, and act with precision. Her mind began mapping out the sequence of conversations, noting patterns of entitlement and moments where she had been taken for granted. Each observation reinforced her understanding that her value had been overlooked, but now she possessed the leverage to correct the imbalance. David continued to explain details, highlighting areas where the children might unknowingly violate the provisions, and Evelyn felt a calm clarity settle over her. The tension of the previous week's interactions shifted into a structured plan of action. As the meeting concluded, Evelyn carefully placed the documents into a secure folder. She left the office feeling measured confidence, knowing that patience, observation, and strategy would guide her next steps. Every action she had witnessed in her home, every casual remark and expectation, now made sense in a broader context. She had the insight to navigate her family with the wisdom she had cultivated over decades. Walking back to her car, the afternoon light warmed her face, and Evelyn realized that empowerment could come quietly, through preparation and foresight rather than immediate confrontation. And for the first time in days, she felt the beginnings of peace, understanding that control over her future was firmly back in her hands. Over the next several days, Evelyn said very little. She followed her normal routine, prepared her coffee each morning, tended to her small garden, and listened carefully. The difference was that she no longer listened as a mother trying to help. She listened as an observer gathering facts. It was remarkable how much people revealed when they assumed you would always agree with them. On Tuesday, Linda arrived carrying grocery bags and a long list of errands. She entered the house without knocking, set her purse on the kitchen counter, and immediately began discussing plans for the following month. "You will probably need to watch the kids 3 days a week," she said casually. "Daycare costs are getting ridiculous." Evelyn looked up from her book. Not once did Linda ask whether she was available. Not once did she ask whether Evelyn had made plans of her own. The assumption was automatic. Evelyn smiled politely and returned her attention to the page. Linda continued talking, unaware that every word was being carefully filed away. Later that afternoon, Michael called. His voice carried the familiar tone he used whenever he wanted something. After a few minutes of small talk, he began describing a home improvement project he hoped to complete before winter. He mentioned financing options. He mentioned rising costs. Then he paused long enough for the expectation to become obvious. Evelyn recognized the pattern immediately. She had seen it dozens of times over the years. The request was never direct at first. It always arrived wrapped inside a conversation. "That sounds expensive," she said calmly. Michael laughed. "Everything is expensive these days." The subject lingered there for several seconds before moving on. When the call ended, Evelyn sat quietly in her chair and reflected on how predictable the conversations had become. By Thursday evening, another revealing moment arrived. Several relatives gathered at Linda's house for a family dinner. Evelyn attended as she always had. She brought a homemade pie and arrived on time. During the meal, the conversation turned toward retirement. One cousin asked Evelyn how she was enjoying her new freedom. Before she could answer, Linda spoke first. "Mom does not really need all that free time," she joked. "We have plenty of ways to keep her busy." Laughter circled the table. Evelyn noticed that no one seemed surprised by the comment. That realization stayed with her. This was not simply Linda's attitude. It had become a shared expectation. As dessert was served, Michael mentioned that his family was considering a vacation next summer. Then he smiled and added, "Maybe Mom can help us make it happen." More laughter followed. Evelyn smiled politely while cutting a slice of pie. Inside, however, another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. No one at the table seemed interested in what retirement meant for her. They were only interested in how retirement might benefit them. Driving home that night, she replayed the conversations in her mind. The road ahead was quiet, illuminated by rows of streetlights stretching into the distance. For years, she had interpreted these moments as thoughtlessness. Now she saw something else. Convenience. She had become convenient. Her time was convenient. Her savings were convenient. Her willingness to help was convenient. The more she observed, the clearer everything became. And with every passing day, Evelyn found herself growing less emotional and more certain. She was no longer trying to understand her children. She was beginning to understand exactly what they expected from her. The day arrived when Evelyn finally met with David Thompson again to discuss the legal documents her late husband had prepared years before. She walked into the office with quiet determination, noticing the sunlight filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows and reflecting off the polished wood of the conference table. David greeted her warmly and gestured to a seat, indicating that he had something important to show her. As she sat down, he opened the folder and began explaining the intricate details of the estate plan. Every clause was designed to protect Evelyn, to ensure that her children acted with respect and fairness, and to provide clear consequences for neglect or disregard. He showed her annotations indicating that behavior previously unnoticed would now have direct impact on asset allocation and privileges within the family. Evelyn listened carefully, her mind connecting the dots between past subtle slights and the documented expectations her children were now bound to follow. She examined each page, noting the foresight in her husband's planning, and realized that for years she had quietly absorbed disregard without understanding its consequences. Yet now she held the tools to assert her dignity. Her eyes flicked to the highlighted sections detailing specific scenarios in which her children had been expected to acknowledge her contributions and treat her with consideration. She recognized familiar patterns and was struck by the clarity of the legal guidance. David continued, explaining the conditions under which various parts of the estate could be adjusted if the children acted inconsistently with the principles outlined. Evelyn's calm demeanor did not waver. She felt a measured sense of empowerment settle over her. The office was quiet except for the soft hum of air conditioning and occasional street sounds, giving her a chance to absorb each nuance without distraction. She visualized conversations with Linda and Michael, recalling each tone, each subtle pressure, each casual assumption that she would comply. Everything now fit into a framework she could work with, allowing her to act with patience and precision rather than impulsive emotion. As the meeting progressed, she began to form a strategy in her mind, understanding that observation and timing would be her allies in addressing past disrespect and ensuring her role and value were acknowledged appropriately. David summarized key points, emphasizing the long-term protections for her rights, and Evelyn felt a profound sense of relief and control. When the discussion concluded, she carefully packed the documents back into the folder and rose from her chair, walking toward the door with steady, deliberate steps, fully aware that her perspective had shifted. She no longer felt as though her retirement marked vulnerability. Instead, it marked the beginning of a new chapter in which she possessed insight, authority, and the quiet power to influence her family dynamics thoughtfully. Stepping out into the afternoon light, she realized that empowerment could be measured not by immediate confrontation, but by understanding the rules, observing behavior, and preparing with patience for the right moment to assert her worth. During the weeks that followed, Evelyn changed nothing on the surface. She still answered phone calls. She still attended family dinners. She still smiled when her grandchildren ran to greet her. Yet internally, something had shifted. She was no longer reacting as a mother eager to please. She was observing as someone finally willing to see the truth. The more she watched, the more obvious the pattern became. One Saturday morning, Linda called before 8 o'clock. "I need a favor," she said before even asking how Evelyn was doing. Her youngest child had a soccer tournament nearly 30 miles away, and she needed someone to spend the day watching the older children. Evelyn listened quietly. In the past, she would have agreed immediately. This time she paused. "I already have plans today," she replied. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted several seconds. "Plans?" Linda finally asked. The surprise in her voice was impossible to miss. Evelyn almost smiled. It was not the question itself that mattered. It was the assumption behind it. Linda had never considered the possibility that her mother might have a life of her own. That afternoon, Evelyn drove to a nearby botanical garden and spent several peaceful hours walking among the flowers and shaded pathways. She carried a small notebook and occasionally stopped to write down her thoughts. For the first time in years, she felt no guilt for choosing herself. The following week, Michael called. His home renovation project had become more expensive than expected. He carefully explained the situation, mentioning rising material costs and contractor delays. Evelyn listened patiently. She recognized every step of the conversation. The setup, the explanation, the gradual approach toward a request. Finally, it arrived. "I was wondering if you could help a little." Evelyn looked out her living room window before responding. "I think it would be best if you handled this one yourself." Another silence followed. Not anger. Not disappointment. Surprise. The same surprise Linda had shown. Evelyn ended the call politely and returned to her book. Later, that evening, she sat on her back porch as the sun disappeared behind the trees. A cool breeze moved through the yard. For years, she had believed that saying yes was proof of love. Now she was beginning to understand that boundaries could also be an expression of self-respect. The most revealing moment came during a family dinner 2 weeks later. Several relatives were gathered around the table when Linda casually mentioned that Evelyn had become less available lately. The statement was intended as a joke. A few people laughed. Evelyn noticed Michael glance down at his plate. Linda continued speaking. Retirement seems to have made Mom very busy. More laughter followed. Evelyn took a sip of iced tea and remained calm. What interested her was not the joke itself. It was the frustration hidden beneath it. For the first time, her children were encountering a version of their mother they did not recognize. A woman who still cared deeply about her family, but no longer organized her life around their expectations. Driving home later that night, Evelyn reflected on how quickly people adjusted to generosity and how uncomfortable they became when it was no longer unlimited. She thought about the documents resting safely inside her desk drawer. She thought about the conversations she had recorded in memory. Most importantly, she thought about the future. Every day, the picture became clearer. Her children believed they were losing access to something they deserved. Evelyn was beginning to realize they had never truly understood what they had been given in the first place. The next family dinner arrived with a sense of anticipation that Evelyn quietly noted. She arrived carrying a small dessert she had baked, setting it on the table with her usual calm demeanor. Linda immediately launched into her usual monologue about upcoming events, bills, and expectations, casually assuming Evelyn would manage them. Evelyn listened carefully, nodding politely at the right moments, but saying very little. Her silence seemed to increase the tension around the table. Michael chimed in with updates about his work, subtly implying that Evelyn's time and resources would be needed to help facilitate his plans. Each request was wrapped in casual conversation, designed to appear as normal family discussion, but Evelyn recognized the pattern from previous weeks. She observed carefully, noting every subtle inflection, every pause, every assumption about her willingness to participate. At one point, a cousin made a comment about how retirement had given her free time, and Linda laughed, adding that they would certainly benefit from having her available. Evelyn smiled politely, her expression serene, but internally she cataloged each remark, each gesture, each expectation. She saw clearly how her children viewed her not as a person entering a new phase of life, but as a resource to be drawn upon without consideration for her own desires. The meal continued, with laughter, light conversation, and small jokes at her expense. Evelyn observed each one without anger or confrontation, understanding that this was the moment where her children were testing boundaries and measuring reactions. When the dinner concluded, Evelyn offered to help clear the dishes but intentionally paced herself, allowing Linda and Michael to manage most of the cleanup. This small action was deliberate, demonstrating that she could engage when she chose to, not out of obligation. Later that evening, as she sat quietly in her favorite chair with the soft glow of a table lamp illuminating her notes, she reviewed every interaction. She considered the conversations, the timing, the underlying assumptions, and the small details that revealed her children's expectations. She felt a growing sense of clarity and confidence. Her husband's foresight with legal documents suddenly seemed even more valuable, a safety net that could ensure her dignity and reinforce her boundaries. Evelyn reflected on the week, realizing that she had shifted from reacting automatically to observing, assessing, and preparing her next step strategically. Every request, every casual comment, every assumed obligation had been noted, cataloged, and mentally filed. She understood that this measured observation was more powerful than confrontation. The day ended with her feeling not frustration, but a growing sense of empowerment, knowing that patience, awareness, and quiet action would allow her to navigate her family dynamics thoughtfully, asserting her value on her own terms while maintaining composure and grace in every interaction. And as she turned off the lights and prepared for bed, she felt a renewed sense of control over her life and her future, confident that she was beginning to reclaim her autonomy in subtle but meaningful ways. Several days later, Evelyn received a call from David Thompson asking whether she would be available for a family meeting the following week. His tone was calm, but she immediately understood the significance of the invitation. For months, she had been observing, listening, and learning. Now it seemed the time for observation was slowly giving way to action. She agreed to attend and spent the next few days continuing her normal routine. She watered her flowers, met a friend for lunch, and enjoyed long walks through the park. Yet beneath the surface, she felt an unusual sense of calm anticipation. The morning of the meeting arrived bright and clear. Evelyn dressed carefully and drove downtown to David's office. The familiar building stood against the skyline, its glass exterior reflecting the sunlight. Inside, she was escorted to the conference room where she found David already organizing several folders on the polished table. One by one, the others arrived. Linda entered first, carrying her usual confidence. Michael followed shortly afterward, looking slightly curious but unconcerned. Both greeted their mother politely before taking seats across from her. Evelyn noticed how relaxed they appeared. Neither seemed to suspect that the meeting had anything to do with them. Small talk filled the room for several minutes. Linda discussed an upcoming school event for her children. Michael mentioned work projects and weekend plans. Evelyn listened quietly, occasionally smiling, but saying very little. Eventually, David closed the folder in front of him and folded his hands. The room grew noticeably quieter. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "There are several matters regarding the Parker family estate that need clarification." Linda exchanged a quick glance with Michael. Both appeared mildly surprised but not concerned. David began reviewing documents that Evelyn had already seen. He explained the structure of the estate, the protections that had been established years earlier, and the intentions behind them. As he spoke, the atmosphere slowly changed. The casual confidence that had filled the room began to fade. David's explanation was precise and professional. He outlined provisions designed to ensure respect, consideration, and responsible behavior toward Evelyn. The language was straightforward. Expectations had been documented. Standards had been established. Consequences had been clearly defined. Michael leaned forward slightly. Linda's expression became more serious. Neither interrupted. Evelyn remained silent, observing every reaction. She noticed the subtle tension appearing around Linda's eyes. She noticed Michael rereading certain pages more than once. Most importantly, she noticed something she had not seen in a very long time. They were finally paying attention. As the discussion continued, David carefully explained how certain decisions regarding future distributions could be influenced by ongoing behavior and family relationships. The room became increasingly quiet. No one argued. No one raised their voice. The realization unfolding before them was far more powerful than any confrontation could have been. For years, Evelyn's generosity had been treated as permanent and unconditional. Now everyone at the table was beginning to understand that respect carried value too. When the meeting paused briefly, Evelyn looked out the window at the city below. Cars moved through intersections. People hurried along sidewalks. Life continued as normal. Yet inside that conference room, something important had shifted. For the first time since her retirement, she felt that the truth was no longer hers alone to carry. Others were finally being asked to see it as clearly as she did. The meeting concluded with a quiet finality that seemed to settle over everyone present. Evelyn rose from her chair with a calm dignity, carefully gathering the documents that had laid bare the expectations and responsibilities that had long been unspoken yet clearly understood now. Linda and Michael remained seated for a moment, processing what had been revealed. The atmosphere was free of arguments, raised voices, or confrontational gestures, but it carried an undeniable weight of realization. Evelyn observed them carefully, noticing subtle changes in posture, the brief flicker of hesitation in their eyes, and the small adjustments they made as if recalibrating their assumptions about her role in the family. As they left the room one by one, each child glanced at her, some with genuine surprise, others with quiet acknowledgement, yet all carrying the awareness that her position and value could no longer be taken for granted. Evelyn stayed behind for a moment, feeling a sense of calm empowerment she had not experienced in years. She walked out into the sunlight, the city stretching before her, warm and familiar, and she felt a lightness in her steps, a clarity in her thoughts, and a confidence that she would continue to live life on her own terms. The afternoon air carried the gentle hum of urban life, yet in that space, everything was measured, purposeful, and deliberate. Evelyn reflected on the past weeks, the patterns of behavior, the subtle tests, the unspoken expectations, and she realized that her patience and quiet observation had revealed more truth than confrontation ever could. The estate documents, her husband's foresight, and her own meticulous attention to detail had created a framework within which she could move confidently, knowing that her rights, dignity, and self-respect were intact. Walking down the steps of the building, she noticed the distant figures of Linda and Michael standing near the entrance, their expressions subdued and reflective, no longer carrying the casual assumption that she would comply without consideration. Every small gesture, every glance, every word had been accounted for, observed, and understood. Evelyn felt neither triumph nor resentment, only a profound sense of balance and fairness finally restored. She paused for a moment to look around at the bustling city, the sunlight catching on glass and pavement, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel fully present in the moment, knowing that she had navigated the complexities of family expectations with grace and intelligence. The journey from retirement to self-awareness had been long and filled with subtle revelations. Yet as she continued walking, she embraced a newfound freedom, a space in which her contributions were respected, her voice mattered, and her future would be guided by her own choices. No one could diminish her value, and she felt secure in the knowledge that her patience, understanding, and quiet resolve had shifted the family dynamic permanently. Each step carried purpose, each breath carried relief, and Evelyn understood deeply that the most enduring power lies not in confrontation but in clarity, preparation, and the unwavering commitment to preserve one's dignity while moving forward into the next chapter of life.